We are back this week with a movie that, oddly enough, falls a year after our last movie, and we're talking about 1987's Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors.
Which I personally would say is the second best of the series. I mean, I do like the original Nightmare on Elm Street the best, but this movie I think is a really good sequel. And to be honest with you, looking at the whole franchise, and I haven't seen all of 5 and 6, so it's hard to, I shouldn't really say my opinion on those two because of that, but I've seen every single other one. I've seen, 1, 2, 3, 4, A New Nightmare, Freddy vs. Jason, and the remake. I will say the first Nightmare on Elm Street and Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors, those two are my favorite of the series.
I mean, this is only the second one we've done recently, even though we did the original Nightmare not too long ago. I guess it's probably been a couple of years ago now, but so we did Part 2 not too long ago, and now we're doing Part 3 right away. And 2017 is the 40th anniversary of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, and me and Mark are gearing up for another flashback weekend in Chicago this coming summer, which is actually going to be a giant Nightmare on Elm Street reunion of sorts. So there's going to be a bunch of different people from probably almost all of the Nightmare movies, if not all of them.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty cool.
I'm most excited for the fact that Heather Langenkamp is signed up for Flashback finally. And I have to say, too, that Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, that's probably my favorite thing, too, is because Nancy's back in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, which is pretty cool because she was missing in Part 2, and you could definitely tell a difference.
Yeah, didn't we kind of talk about that in our Part 2 episode, that we didn't know exactly why she didn't return?
Right, yeah, and I still didn't do any digging on that, which, I mean, maybe that's a fault of my own, I guess. But yeah, she is definitely back in this one, which is kind of funny because if you go back to the original one, so at the very end of the movie, part of the reason why Nancy defeats Freddy is because she figures out that, if I just don't let him have any power over me, he doesn't have any power over me.
Yeah.
Easy peasy.
That's it.
And then you have this movie, which really wasn't a time frame in this movie, which I'm kind of glad that they got away from, because you had Part 2, which was supposed to be 5 years after the incidents of the first one, even though it was like a year later. And then you have Part 3, which is like 2-3 years later. They didn't really put a time frame as to when this occurred into the first one, even though you can kind of figure it out because she's coming out of college and her dad's a washed up drunk, but he's still working on the police force and stuff. So you can kind of figure out that it's okay. So it's probably like Part 2 was like 5 years after the incidents of the first one, and this one's probably like 6-7 years after the incidents of the first one. Okay. Because that's one of the biggest things you get into with horror movies is when they start putting time frames on the different sequels. And then, because one of the things, to not jump too far off from Freddy, but when you look at the Friday the 13th series, because there were so many movies in the Friday the 13th series, and then you start piecing together, like, okay, so how many Friday the 13th were there in the summer months when all this stuff was happening? And so this happened here and this happened there, and then, so Jason's like 97 years old by the whatever, movie comes out.
Yeah. It actually, like, I read something about all the timeline of the Friday the 13th movies, and like if you were to follow that, it was like some ridiculous, like, by the time you got to like Part 7 or Part 8, it would have been like in the 2000s, and then those movies were still in the 80s being filmed, so it's
Right.
kind of weird. Yeah, so that's one thing you got to be really careful with, and I guess that's one thing that the Halloween franchise did get right is that they typically tried to do the movie, like the sequels, right after the other. Like the first Halloween 1 and Halloween 2, it's what was like basically the same night, and then 10 years later, from when they did Halloween 4, which was the next Michael Myers movies, because obviously 3 didn't have anything to do with them. But they based it in 1988, and then 4 and 5 were like literally like again like just like 1 and 2. It was like kind of followed the next day, and then I think it went into the following year.
Right.
So they kept the timeline right in there, and then 6, whatever that followed right along with that too. But yeah, with these, you got to. I think that's one thing these directors need to do, and filmmakers is that I would say if you're gonna do a franchise and you're gonna make a movie every year, like they did with Friday and Nightmare, just make it where it's like a year apart. Let's not go into the future here. In 2017, we're watching, a Friday the 13th movie that's supposed to be in 2010 or whatever, and it's like, oh wow, they're still watching VHS movies.
Well, the one thing that you can get away with Freddy that you probably couldn't get away with Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers is, Freddy's in the dreams of these folks.
Yeah, that's true.
Even though in part 2 he kind of it was more of a possession type movie. In all reality, this movie, because it didn't happen at the same place that 1 and 2 took place in, I mean, this movie could have been at the same time frame as part 2, because it's different characters and different settings, and it's all, completely supernatural's not the right word for it, but it kind of is supernatural depending on how you look at it. It's all whatever you want to call that, psychological, or however you want to get into it when you're thinking about the dreams. And you have this weird stuff where people are pulling each other into dreams, and I can share my dream with you, and I can pull you into my dream, and I can share my dream with you. And I always wondered how, when you have some of movies like, especially like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street movies, even though I imagine a lot of them probably don't really pay much attention to it, but if you have like some of these scientists and stuff, and doctors and psychologists and stuff whose profession is like whatever the technical term for that is, but people that study like dream sequences and like sleep patterns and stuff, and then they hear shit like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 comes along, and they're like, oh, I can pull people into my dreams, and people are like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah, this movie, and one of the things we should mention about this movie too is that this is Wes Craven kind of returned to the production of this film. And originally his original intent was to do what he did with the New Nightmare, where he's going to make it kind of more of a meta-physical film where it's like the characters are kind of popping into the real world and all that, which I'm glad they didn't do it that way. But what they did come up with this story, I think this is a really good story. Basically you've got these kids that have been put into a mental health facility because, they're acting out on these, believing that they're going crazy basically because of these dreams that they're having. And nobody believes them. Nobody, all the authority figures are thinking they're just kooky and that there's no truth to what they're saying. And you need to medicate them more and put them in a cell. And all it is like, these repressed feelings and all this stuff. And, it really, I just thought the story was great. And then each one of them, each one of the characters in this was, the whole Dream Warriors concept too, where they all have these sort of like powers that they can use in their dreams. And this was the Nightmare on Elm Street movie that it did cross over a little bit into the fantasy realm. And I think it kind of expanded a bit at this point. And the later sequels kept it going in that direction. But I think they went too far a little bit. Like this one, 3 really just kind of was right on the edge of where it was enough horror and enough fantasy to make it a great film.
the biggest difference between part 1 and part 2, and then you get into part 3, is, again, which we've touched on a few times in previous episodes on this show, is the popularity of Freddy Krueger compared to some of the other horror icons of the time.
Yeah.
Is that the production value of part 3 is 10 times of what it was in part 2. You know, in part 2 was above what it was in part 1. So, you know, you could definitely tell that this was definitely a big budget horror movie. I mean,
oh yeah,
you had that scene towards the beginning of the movie where, whatever you want to call it, the snake Freddy or whatever is swallowing the one character. I mean, you have this giant puppet, which is cool too, because even back in this day, 30 years ago, they still had the common sense to do practical effects with a lot of this stuff rather than trying to do some of the computer animated stuff, which they kind of did a little bit in this movie, but a lot of the scenes were still practical effects, which is really cool, which I know they kind of got away from in some of the later movies. But
yeah, they did a great job with the effects in this movie for sure. I thought the special effects were top notch.
The only effect of this movie that really kind of bugs me even to this day, again, and this is just the two of us being a couple of 40-year-old assholes, is towards the end of the movie when whatever it's Sheriff Thompson or Deputy Thompson or whatever he is in this movie takes the one head doctor to the junkyard to bury the bones, and then Freddy's skeleton is like dancing around, and you can tell it's like
the stop motion.
Yeah, you can and it just looks crappy for some reason.
They never really. I mean, the stop motion effects. I mean, it is what it is. You kind of accept it as. I mean, it's the same effect they used for the original Terminator movie when, the Terminator, they show it walking towards at the end of the film with the endoskeleton. It's actually probably the same effect that what was the old classic Sinbad and film with the skeletons that he's attacking, that he's fighting with the swords. So it's that same effect, that kind of cheesy stop motion models, and yeah, it kind of throws you off a little bit. And probably a CGI skeleton would look good nowadays, and they could obviously do a good job with that, where it look a lot more realistic. But that was 1987, so they kind of tried to do their best they could with what they had. But some of the effects I thought were great. Like I thought Freddy's head coming out of the TV was great.
Yep.
The scene with Patricia Arquette with the when Freddy comes out of the sink, basically is like his claw, or the faucet becomes his claw and all that. I thought that was great. Yeah, there's some, and like you said, like the worm Freddy or whatever that was a pretty cool effect too. And character-wise too, I think these are some of the best characters in a Nightmare on Elm Street film as well. They really are. I think bringing Nancy back was pretty vital, and in a way, kind of ending Nancy too, which was kind of strange. That they brought her back and then that was it. That was sort of like she gets killed off in that movie.
Well,
but I thought,
I don't know. See, that's the thing though, because with that being killed off, I mean, that was kind of a staple in horror movies, except for Halloween.
Yeah.
I mean, Friday the 13th did that in a lot of their movies was, we're going to bring back the girl from the last movie and just kill her off right away.
Yeah, that's true. Like Adrian King, Friday.
But yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird that they brought her through the whole thing, and then she gets killed off at the end of the movie, which is kind of odd. Or maybe not odd, it's not the right word. And not to give too much away from the next movie, but then you go into Friday the 13th Part 4, and again, some of the characters from this movie carried over into the next one.
Oh yeah, yeah. They definitely had, like, with this movie, there was definitely, they had something to build off of. Whereas with Part 2, I think they realized that, we can't really take this any further. Yeah. So they had to kind of start from scratch. And then once 3 came, really 3, 4, and 5 are, kind of real close follow-ups, similar to like Halloween 4 and Halloween 5.
Right.
Where they really keep these characters going, where there's a strong link between each film.
And it's kind of funny, too, when you think about it now, and I've never really thought about it before. A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 kind of does the same thing that the Halloween franchise did a little bit over the years, and other horror movies have done the same as well. But so you had A Nightmare on Elm Street, the original that came out, and you had Nancy and all of her friends that were, of course, killed by Freddy Krueger. And then you had this film 5 years later with Jesse and Tiffany. And then Part 3 came out, and Nancy's back, and Nancy's dad's back, and they even, she even mentioned that, oh yeah, my mom died in her sleep, but there's no mention of any of the characters from Part 2 at all. And then it just kind of goes off into the sunset, and there's never any mention of it. I don't think that there was any mention of the characters from Part 2 in any of the movies after that. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, that didn't happen. And,
it did, like, kind of, like, Part 2 is just sort of a standalone film kind of. Where do you fit that in the timeline? And then Part 3 comes out, and it's like completely whole new. Okay, it didn't. Part 2 is a very, very much a standalone film. I'm wondering if Part 6 was too. I don't remember, like, the characters in that one. I'll have to go back and revisit that one, but I never saw it all the way through. But like, that didn't seem to connect to Part 5 or the previous ones, at least storyline wise. So. But yeah, 3 is definitely, to me, it is like kind of almost like the follow up to 1, because it brings Nancy back, Nancy's dad back, and the characters are very realistic, to where they where you would think they would be. Like, Nancy becomes sort of like she's like a therapist intern for this mental health facility with like a specialty in dreams and nightmares. And then her dad, he was this police chief or whatever in the first movie, and then like all the things he went through in that movie, and now he's like a security guard and alcoholic, hanging out at the bar and that kind of thing, and pretty much lost everything, and is just trying to survive at this point. But I thought that was great. And also, one thing too with this movie that was kind of I thought was really cool was they added on to the Freddy mythology, and they came up with an idea for how he came about, and like the whole idea that he was the bastard child of like 1,000 maniacs or whatever, that this nun gets like caught in this mental health facility and over the holidays and is like raped repeatedly, and then that's like the beginning of Freddy.
I was going to ask you about that because I wondered how you felt about that being, a couple movies into the series, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, hey, we're going to add this kind of mythology to the character, even though it kind of fits a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, and actually that I think is pretty cool. I mean, this movie, I would have to say this is probably my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
Is it? Okay.
And I think we touched on this probably more than we probably should have in Part 2. I've said openly on this show that of what we would consider the main three, Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, I personally, even though I think it's probably been the most popular over the years, I would consider A Nightmare on Elm Street the weaker of the horror series. Of the A Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I would say that Part 3 is definitely my favorite. And for some reason, and I still don't know why, and this hasn't been going on for a very long time, and I think it actually stems from when me and my wife watched last year the Heather Langenkamp documentary, the I Am Nancy movie. But I am a huge, huge Heather Langenkamp fan. Watching this movie with her in it is great. I haven't done so yet, but I actually kind of want to go back and watch, Wes Craven's, A New Nightmare, where they're all back after the fact, and that's where Freddy's in the real world or whatever. Mm-hmm. Just cause I don't know why, but when it was announced that she's going to be at Flashback Weekend this year, I am stoked. I'm like, Heather Langenkamp's going to be at Flashback Weekend. That's freaking awesome.
Well, yeah, I think, she's really, there is something about her, I think, in terms of when you think of all the Elm Street girls, and let's be honest, I know you and I are more Friday fans than Nightmare fans, but you go back to 1987, 88, when these movies were hitting, when we had 3 and 4 and they were making them every year. I mean, you go back to our, elementary school and junior high and all that. Freddy was king. I mean, everybody was talking about Freddy.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of funny that, you would think that we'd have more nostalgia or something for that character. But I think looking back now, it's well, Jason was, I guess, kind of cooler. And but I think Heather Langenkamp is the epitome of the Friday girls, the Nightmare girls, because I mean, the other ones were just kind of, I don't know, none of them held up as much in terms of really stood out. And I guess it's also the films that she was in. I mean, being in the first 1 and 3, which are my favorite, you said 3 is your favorite. I think that really holds a lot of weight. I mean, the girl who played Alice in 4 and 5, 4 was entertaining and all that, but I don't know, she doesn't hold as much weight, I guess, in the whole scheme of things.
Right. I think the two of us were just cooler than everybody else, back in the day.
I think so. But I think too, I think of the first movie with Heather Langenkamp, and when she's setting up the traps for Freddy, nobody doesn't believe her, that mom doesn't believe her, nobody believes that Freddy's back, and the police don't believe her, so she's goes and kind of does her own thing and sets those traps, and she is the the main scream queen of the Nightmare series. There's just no getting around it.
Well, if you haven't seen the documentary I Am Nancy, you should go watch it, because it really plays into a lot of what me and Mark do, and there's a lot of people that do nowadays, and that is these conventions, the horror conventions. So it's very relevant, and I'll come back to it. But the other thing that people should do is you should read Carrie Fisher's books, the biography type books that she wrote, the Princess Diaries and things like that, where she talks about going to conventions as well. But to go back to Heather and the I Am Nancy thing is, she goes to these conventions and, people recognize her, of course. She's Nancy Thompson from A Nightmare on Elm Street and Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. she's at these conventions where there's multiple people from A Nightmare on Elm Street movies, including Robert Englund. If you've never been to a horror convention or you have been to a horror convention, when you go and meet these celebrities and you give them your whatever, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, and they sign an 8x10 for you, you know, almost all of them ask you, oh, would you like me to make it out to you? Or would you like me to put a phrase from the movie on it? And there's a couple of times in the I Am Nancy documentary where people are like, yeah, can you put this phrase or that phrase or this phrase on it? And they're all Freddy phrases. They're none of, you know, Nancy phrases from the movies. And it's one of those things to where for some reason, you know, even though everybody's like, oh my God, it's Nancy, they want Robert Englund's stuff on the signature. Yeah.
Well, he's kind of king, I guess, when it comes to the Nightmare franchise.
Which I don't see, and maybe it's because and this could totally be the reason for it, but Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees are both mutes, so maybe that's why when you go to these horror conventions and you have, you know, the final girls from whatever movie, you know, you don't really hear too much about like, oh yeah, so I signed this and they wanted some Michael Myers quote on there, because I guess there really isn't any, but
yeah, because like Freddy was the first. That's one thing we should mention too. Freddy was kind of like, you know, all of the slashers before him were, like you said, mutes. Like they didn't really have much personality. You know, they wore masks and they were just kind of in and out. I mean, if for crying out loud, the Michael Myers they called him the Shape. They didn't even think of him as a human being, like throughout the franchise. And so Freddy comes along and like, it's the first time you really get a personality in a slasher. You know, he's got the wisecracks and all that stuff, and, you know, no mask instead. You know, he's got the makeup, obviously, but, you know, so this character, you know, the one, you know, there's so many lines throughout the whole franchise that, you know, I'm sure Robert Englund's asked to recite them all, and there's so many things he could sign a poster or whatever with his autograph with. So that's probably why whereas with like a Halloween film, you know, like you know, I could picture more like a Jamie Lee Curtis quote or something like that, or a PJ Souls quote, as opposed to, I mean, like obviously Michael Myers can't really quote anything.
So if you were to quote PJ Souls, what would you quote?
Totally.
I was just checking.
Or let's see, another PJ Souls quote.
No, that's it. That's
see anything you like.
I can't remember where I saw it with her, where she said that she writes totally. It's like 20 times more than anything else that she's ever asked to write.
Probably. Well,
which is funny because I don't think that was intentional.
That she would say that so much?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if she added that in or if that was part of the script. Because I know Deborah Hill wrote the dialogue for the girls. That wasn't John Carpenter, so we don't have him to blame for that.
But, I mean, you know, when you have some of those running gags or whatever in movies, like, you know, the biggest one with a single word that's repeated throughout a movie would be inconceivable from A Princess Bride.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't think that totally was really meant to be a running gag. I think it was just something that just popped up, because I don't even remember that being such a big thing when we were younger, actually, until probably like the last 10 years or so, until you really started, you know, with social media and stuff. And then when you go back and you watch it, you're like, oh, she does say it like 1,000 times throughout the movie.
Oh, yeah.
And she's only in the movie for like 8 minutes or something.
She says it quite a bit.
Well,
sure.
I know.
Oh, another thing we should say about this movie, I thought was kind of a cool connection to a later film, was the drug Hypnosil. It's the anti-dream drug that Nancy's taking. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, the doctor gets, he ends up prescribing it to all the clients or all the patients, and so that's part of the reason why he loses his job. But that same drug, Hypnosil, is the same drug they used in Freddy versus Jason. None of the that's why Freddy didn't exist anymore, because none of the Elm Street kids were offspring were dreaming any longer. So that was kind of a cool little connection there.
Oh, cool. See, folks, you learn something every day on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you going to give this one a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Oh, I would give a Nightmare 3 a thumbs up for sure.
Yeah, me too. You got to see this one. You could probably skip part 2. I mean, if part 2 is a fun one. It really has like classic Freddy in it. That's like I don't know. I think they kept it, like I said in the previous podcast, that they kept it pretty much in the horror vein. But 3 is definitely the superior film, and yeah, you got to see this one for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing we didn't really mention, I mean, we kind of mentioned that she was in it, but so you had Heather Langenkamp, who made her triumphant return to the movie, but then this one too, you also had a very young Patricia Arquette.
Yeah, her first film role too, and a very young Lawrence Fishburne.
That is correct, and I don't think
he's actually called Larry Fishburne. Which is
I was going to say, because I don't think he was he went by his real name in this one.
Yeah.
And then the other thing too with this one, which is a little odd coming off of the Kill Count in Part 2, is that overall this one actually has a fairly low death rate, especially for being a movie of the later 80s, because there's only like 6 people that get killed in this movie. And, by the time 1987 come around, you had 38 Halloween movies, 47 Nightmare on Elm Street movies, 1,000, holiday slasher movies.
Yeah. And you could say in a way that this movie, I think, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, in my opinion, was like the real opening up the doors to the fantasy horror films that came after it, that sort of copied the whole idea. Let's go kind of all over the place with this. And a good example would be Hello, Mary Lou Prom Night 2, which was pretty much like a Freddy / Carrie ripoff movie. And it just kind of the whole fantasy horror thing, like things are dreams and all that stuff. And I think Nightmare 3 really was that kind of gateway movie that really kind of showed a lot of filmmakers, hey, we could really take horror films into a whole different direction. We don't have to just stick with the typical slasher in the neighborhood or the campgrounds kind of thing. We could really make it all about the fantasies and the dreams and the this and the that. And so I think this one kind of and this one obviously opened the door for the rest of the franchise to turn it into Freddy movies that after this are more like, I don't know, like Harry Potter movies almost, which is kind of funny, by the way. Did you notice there was a character in this movie that was almost like a Harry Potter character?
Well, he was the wizard or whatever.
Yes, he was.
Maybe that's where J.K. Rowling got her inspiration from.
That may have been. Big thumbs up for us on this one. And also the death scenes on this movie are great. I think this is some of the best, most creative, most entertaining, most interesting death scenes. The puppet guy, the girl on the TV, the tongue-tied scene. I thought and that's not necessarily a death scene, but that was a good scene. I think it was just very creative film. I mean, they really took the Freddy concept and really took it to the next level.
Yeah, they're all pretty good in this one. They only got better too, even when you got into like part 4 and part 5. And if I remember correctly, was it part 4 or part 5 that like half of the kills ended up on the cutting room floor because?
Oh, that was 5.
Was it 5?
Yeah. 5 was, yeah, it was beat really. It was torn up really bad.
Was 5 the one with the motorcycle scene?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the scene where he feeds the one girl. That was cut up pretty bad, too.
And we talked about this, I think, actually we talked about this on an episode that we were talking about Friday the 13th Part 6, the novelization of that movie back in the 80s. And I'm not sure if it happened too much in the 90s or not, but a lot of horror movies got books written about them. And I remember reading, it must have been A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5. I read the book before the movie came out, or before I saw the movie. And then after the fact, I had read that, a bunch of stuff got cut out because I was like, oh, that wasn't in the movie. But of course, at that time too, I was, 13, 14, 15 years old. So, I was reading this book at home, and then I probably didn't see the movie till it came out on video. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I remember for Freddy 5, they had like the big cardboard cutout at the video store of Freddy standing next to the baby buggy.
I think we'll probably. I'm just going to go ahead and say it now because I think we'll probably go ahead and probably do a Nightmare movie every month until.
That's a great idea. Yeah, that's a really good idea. I like that.
So, all right, guys, I think that wraps it up for this episode.
Catch us later. We're gonna do some more Nightmare films. We're getting ready, getting pumped for Flashback Weekend 2017. Only a few more months to go. Can't believe we're actually talking about it. Seems like we're just there. But I guess, wow, that was a long time ago.
And the next episode, I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there so we make sure that we do it. The next episode, we will be back with Mark and I's biggest crush.
Oh, we're going to do that episode?
We're going to do that episode.
That is really cool. And it totally fits into a horror movie podcast.